There is a particular kind of joy that lives inside the laughter of a child. It is not the loud, performative happiness that adults sometimes put on display, the kind that comes with occasions and obligations. No. The laughter of a child is wild and unplanned. It erupts from nowhere, from the sight of a butterfly or the feeling of grass between toes, and it fills every corner of whatever room or field it lands in. It is honest. It is pure. And from the very first moment I understood what that sound was, I decided that I wanted to spend my entire life surrounded by it. My name is Kim Si-hyun, and I have always loved children more than anything else in this world. I am 25 years old. I am an Omega, a male Omega, which, in the world I come from, is about as rare and remarkable as finding a four-leaf clover pressed inside an ancient book. My family has had alphas and betas and Omega women going back generations, but never, not once in living memory or in the stories my grandmother used to tell with her silver hair spilling over her shoulders, had there ever been a male Omega in our lineage. And then I was born. My mother told me once, in one of those quiet evenings when the kitchen smelled like doenjang jjigae and the sun was going down slowly behind the apartment buildings, that when the doctor first announced what I was, my grandmother had burst into tears. Not tears of sadness. Tears of something that had no word in any language she knew. A flooding of the chest that comes when something you never knew you were missing suddenly arrives and fills every crack. She held you, my mother said, her eyes soft as warm cloth, and she said, Yuri Jibakdulio Wazio, that the blessing has come home. I grew up wrapped in that blessing like it was a second skin. My grandparents, Harabiaji and Halmiani, treated me as though I were something between a precious jade artifact and their most beloved grandchild, which technically I was. But beyond that, they treated me as though losing sight of me for too long would cause the universe some irreparable damage. My grandfather, a quiet and serious man who barely spoke at mealtimes, would sit with me for hours while I arranged my toy figures into elaborate families. He never laughed at the games I played. He watched them with the same gravity he reserved for the evening news. My grandmother, on the other hand, was a woman made of warmth and dramatics in equal measure. She had strong hands that smelled like sesame oil and a voice that could make any story sound like poetry. She was the one who first noticed that I treated my toys differently than other children treated theirs. "See Hyuni," she said one afternoon when I was about 4 years old, watching me tuck a small stuffed bear into a makeshift bed I had constructed from folded napkins. "What are you doing?" "He's sleepy, Halmiani," I told her very seriously. "He had a big day." She laughed so hard she had to sit down. And then she called my mother in from the kitchen and said, "This child is going to be a wonderful parent someday. Look at him. Look at how carefully he tucks that bear in." I didn't know what parent meant in the full weight of the word back then. But I knew that taking care of small things, making sure they were warm, making sure they felt loved, making sure they never felt alone, was not just something I liked to do. It was something I needed to do. Like breathing. Like eating rice in the morning. It was just part of what I was. By the time I was 7, I had announced with complete confidence to my parents that I was going to become a nanny when I grew up. My father had set down his chopsticks. My mother had exchanged one of those long looks with him, the kind that parents exchange when a child says something that surprises them but also, somehow, doesn't surprise them at all. And then my father had nodded slowly and said, "Then you will be the best nanny in the world, Si-hyuna." That was my father. Park Man-soo, a man of few words and enormous love. He never questioned my path. He never once suggested that a male Omega should perhaps think about something more practical, more protected, more invisible. He and my mother, Lee Young-hee, had raised me on the radical idea that I was allowed to become exactly who I was. My mother went further. She found books about childcare and early childhood development. She enrolled me in junior volunteer programs at local community centers where I helped look after younger children. She drove me to every one without complaint, waited in the parking lot with her thermos of barley tea, and when I climbed back into the car with crayon on my hands and someone else's tears dried on my shoulder, she always said the same thing. "Good work today, baby." I loved my family with an ache that I can still feel in my chest whenever I think about them too long. The way you feel an old scar, not with pain exactly, but with a deep awareness that something important happened there. Something that shaped you. Something you would never be fully able to repay. I graduated from a childcare and early education program at 23. The graduation ceremony was not particularly glamorous. A rented auditorium, plastic chairs, a banner that had been hung slightly crooked and no one had fixed. But my entire family was there. My parents in the front row, my grandfather in his best jacket that he only wore for important things, my grandmother already crying before my name was even called. When I walked across the stage to collect my certificate, I heard her voice above everything else. *Agur Si-hyuni, *. Half the auditorium turned to look. I turned so red that I probably glowed. But I was also smiling so hard my face hurt. That night, my family took me to my favorite restaurant and my grandmother pressed a red envelope into my hands under the table. "For your new beginning," she whispered, squeezing my fingers. Inside was more money than she should have given me. I tried to refuse. She gave me a look that made it very clear refusal was not an option. I started working at a children's play center called Harang Nuri, a wide, colorful space in a well-to-do residential neighborhood that was part indoor playground, part supervised playgroup, part after-school care. I had been working there for almost 2 years by the time everything in my life changed. I was good at my job. I knew that without arrogance, simply as a fact, the way you know that water is wet or that mornings are cold in February. Children trusted me in that immediate, instinctive way that children sometimes have. They would take my hand without hesitation, climb into my lap when they were scared, bring me their broken toys and their confused feelings with equal confidence that I would know how to help. My coworkers teased me sometimes. "Si Hyun Sai," said my colleague Park Ji-yeon once, watching me lead a group of toddlers in a song about seasons. "You have a talent that is genuinely not normal. These children love you more than they love their own parents." I had laughed and shaken my head. But she wasn't. Before we dive into this heartwarming, emotional, slow burn romance Omegaverse story, note, this is an original work of Milliflex channel. If seen in another channel that is not Milliflex, please report that channel for copyright and impersonation. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Entirely wrong. I was happy. Genuinely, quietly, contentedly happy. The kind of happy that doesn't shout but simply sits inside you like warm soup on a cold day. I had no idea what was coming. It was a Thursday in late October when the story of my life changed completely, though I didn't know it yet when I woke up that morning. Thursdays at Harang Nuri were normally the longest days, a full afternoon program followed by an evening session for older kids who came after school. But that particular Thursday, both evening sessions had been canceled because the space had been booked for a private event. This happened occasionally. Wealthy parents hired the entire place for birthday parties, or corporate wellness programs held events for employees' children. Whenever this happened, the staff cleared out by 6 in the evening at the latest, and the place was handed over to whoever had reserved it. I stayed late that day not because I had to, but because I had been reorganizing the book corner, a personal project I had been working on for weeks, recataloguing the picture books by developmental age and seasonal theme. I was deeply absorbed in it, cross-legged on the floor surrounded by towers of picture books, when I realized with a startled jolt that it was nearly 8 o'clock. The other staff had gone. I was alone. I hurriedly started packing up my things, embarrassed by my own obliviousness. The private booking was supposed to have started at 7:30. I needed to leave immediately. I was pulling on my jacket bag over one shoulder when I heard it. Sound. From the main play area. It was the sound of the large colorful building blocks being stacked. The hollow, satisfying knock of large foam and plastic blocks being placed one on top of another. Then, a moment later, the unmistakable mechanical music of the interactive play kitchen that the 3 to 4 age group loved. A child. My first thought was immediate and concerned. A child had been left behind somehow. Or perhaps a child had hidden somewhere during cleanup and no one had found them. It happened occasionally. Children were extraordinary at finding impossible hiding spaces. I set my bag down and moved quietly toward the main play area. The lights in the main room had been turned up, the full bright overhead lights, not the softer ambient ones we used during sessions. The space was large and open, full of colorful equipment. A climbing structure, a ball pit enclosed in mesh netting, low tables with sensory bins, the interactive kitchen, shelves of toys organized by category. I pushed open the door slowly. And I stopped. It was not a child. Standing at the building block station, which was sized for children roughly 2 to 4 years old, meaning the entire setup barely reached his knees, was a man. A very tall man. A broad-shouldered, black-clad, unmistakably adult man who was, with complete concentration and very careful hands, stacking oversized foam blocks into a tower. He hadn't heard me come in. I watched, frozen, as he placed one more block with the precise delicacy of someone who very much did not want the tower to fall. The tower wobbled. He held his breath. Held. And then, very quietly, almost too soft for me to hear, he made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound, the small, low hum of satisfaction that a child makes when something they've been working on finally works. I don't know how long I stood there before he sensed me. It might have been 10 seconds. It might have been a full minute. I was too stunned to track time properly. When he turned, I understood 3 things at once. The first, he was extraordinarily handsome. Not in a gentle or approachable way, in a severe, architectural way, like a building that is beautiful because of its clean lines and its total refusal to be anything other than what it is. Sharp jaw, deep-set eyes, a mouth that looked like it had been pressed into a permanent expression of controlled neutrality. He was wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Multiple rings on his fingers. A watch that caught the light. The second, he was an alpha. An extremely dominant alpha. Even from across the room, his presence hit me like walking into a wall. That particular quality that certain alphas have, the kind that makes the air feel denser, the kind that my omega instincts processed before my brain had a chance to form a coherent sentence. The third, he was absolutely horrified. The color changed in his face, not dramatically, not the obvious flush of someone embarrassed. It was subtler. A tightening around the eyes. A stillness that spread through his whole body with the speed and totality of something closing. Like shutters slamming shut over windows. Like a door locking. He stared at me. I stared at him. The foam block tower stood between us. For a moment, the entire universe seemed to hold very still. Then he said very quietly, "Who are you?" It was not a question. It was the voice of a man accustomed to answers arriving the moment he asked for them. A voice that contained, underneath its quietness, the suggestion of something enormous and dangerous, the way a calm ocean surface can conceal a current that will pull you under. I should have been more frightened than I was. But here is the thing about me, and I am not entirely sure if this is bravery or simply a constitutional inability to process threatening situations correctly. I don't frighten easily in the face of genuine vulnerability. And what I had just seen, underneath all that terrifying stillness and all that expensive clothing, was vulnerability. I had seen it in the careful hands placing the foam blocks. I had heard it in that small, quiet hum. "Kim Si-hyun," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I work here. I stayed late. I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was in here. I was just leaving." He watched me for a long moment. "You saw." Still not a question. I stopped. The intelligent thing would have been to say no, I saw nothing, I just heard a noise and came to check. But something in the way he was looking at me, that controlled, shuttered face that was working very hard to conceal something much more exposed, made the lie feel cruel. "I saw you building a tower," I said honestly. "With the foam blocks." Something moved across his face. So fast I almost missed it. Something that looked, for just a fraction of a second, like fear. Then it was gone and the stillness was back and he said nothing. I picked up my bag from where I had left it by the door. "I'm leaving now. I won't say anything to anyone." I meant it completely. Whatever this man was doing here in a children's play center after hours, building block towers alone, it was his business and no one else's. "Good night." I was almost at the door when he spoke again. "Wait." I turned. He was studying me. The quality of his attention was different from most people's. It was not casual or social. It was the focused, total attention of someone who was used to evaluating situations and people rapidly, with accuracy, as a matter of survival. "You're a nanny?" he said. I blinked. "I work here, yes. With children." "A nanny," he repeated, more firmly, as if confirming something he had just decided. I didn't know how he knew that specifically, the word nanny rather than childcare worker or play center staff. But something in the certainty of his voice made me answer simply. "Yes." He said nothing else. I left. I walked home through the autumn cold with my hands in my pockets and the strangest feeling sitting in my chest. Not fear, not discomfort, but a strange awareness like the feeling you get just before a storm arrives. The air changes. You don't know what's coming. But you know something is. I was home, showered, and drinking warm barley tea when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Kim Si-hyun," said a voice I didn't recognize, professional, neutral, efficient. "My employer would like to discuss a private employment opportunity with you. Are you available tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I should not have gone. I told myself this approximately 15 times on the taxi ride to the address that had been texted to me the following morning. The address was in a part of the city I had never visited, the kind of neighborhood where the streets were wider and quieter than normal, where the houses did not crowd each other, where the walls were high and the trees were old. The house, and calling it a house felt like calling the Pacific Ocean a puddle, was behind a gate that opened automatically at the taxi's approach. The driveway was long and lined with manicured hedges. The building itself was a large, modern structure of concrete and glass with a quality of cold precision that reminded me, inexplicably, of the man I had seen last night. I paid the driver, stood at the entrance for exactly 3 seconds questioning every decision that had led me here, and then rang the bell. The door was opened by a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Choi Woo-jin, the household manager. He was polite, professional, expressionless. He led me through a foyer that was beautiful in the way of spaces where no expense had been spared and no warmth had been added, marble floors, high ceilings, art that looked expensive and meant nothing. I was shown to a sitting room. I sat. I waited. I looked at my hands. I looked at the painting on the wall, abstract, dark blues and blacks, vaguely maritime. I thought about my grandmother's apartment with its crowded surfaces and the smell of sesame and the sound of the radio in the kitchen, and I felt a deep, physical longing for it. The door opened. He came in the way I suspected he did everything, without announcement, without hesitation, filling whatever space he entered with a presence that wasn't loud but was absolute. He was wearing different clothes than the night before. Dark pants, a fitted black sweater with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, his hair slightly less arranged. More human-looking than he had been in the suit, which made him, paradoxically, more intimidating. He sat across from me. He looked at me. "You're Kim Si-hyun," he said. "You know my name," I said. "I know many things about you." He said this without apology. Kim Si-hyun, 25, male Omega. Graduated from the Hwarang Early Education Institute 2 years ago. Currently employed at Hwarang Nuri Play Center. No criminal record. No financial issues of concern. Family, parents Kim Man-soo and Lee Young-hee, maternal grandparents residing in Mapogu. He paused. "You come from a close family." My mouth had gone dry. "You investigated me." "I investigate everyone." Flat. Factual. "My name is Lee Jae-min." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into water. Lee Jae-min. I knew that name. I think everyone in this city knew that name on some level, the way you know the names of thunderstorms after they've passed through, by the damage they leave behind. Lee Jae-min was not a name spoken casually in polite company. It was the kind of name that turned up in whispered conversations, in the careful non-answers of people who knew better than to say too much. The head of a criminal organization so deeply embedded in the infrastructure of this city that some people weren't entirely sure where his operations ended and the legitimate world began. I looked at him across the low table. He looked back at me perfectly still. I thought, I am going to stand up and walk out of here and never come back. I thought, he knows where my grandparents live in Mapogu. I sat very still. "I need a nanny," said Lee Jae-min. I stared at him. "You don't have children." Something shifted at the corners of his eyes. "No." The silence stretched out. And then, slowly, because I was beginning to understand, I said, "You need a nanny for." "For me," he said. Simply. Directly. Without any visible embarrassment. Though I was already learning that Lee Jae-min did not display embarrassment, he locked it away and presented something harder in its place. "I need someone to manage certain needs that I have in this space." He paused. "You already know what you saw last night. This would simply be a formalization of that." I sat with this for a moment. "You want me to be your nanny?" I heard my own voice saying the words. "You want me to take care of you the way I take care of children?" "Yes." "You are a 30-year-old man." "I'm aware." "You are..." I stopped myself before I said what I was actually thinking, which was, "You are one of the most terrifying human beings I have ever been in the same room with." He watched me with those dark, composed eyes. "What I saw last night," I said carefully, "stays with me. I understand that. And I also understand," I chose my words slowly, like selecting stones to step across a river, "that my ability to simply walk away from this conversation is probably limited." He did not confirm or deny this. He just watched me. "What would the arrangement involve?" I asked. "You would live here. This house. Your own suite of rooms. You would be available during the evenings and on days when my schedule allows. You would oversee." He seemed to find the specific vocabulary difficult, which was the first human thing I had seen from him. "The play area. The activities. You would treat me, as you would treat a child in your care." I thought about my parents. I thought about my grandmother's hands squeezing mine. I thought about the red envelope. I thought about the look on his face when he'd realized I had seen him, that flash of something exposed and frightened, and I thought about how a man could be powerful enough to have an entire city afraid of him, and still have something inside him that looked, in an unguarded moment, like a small child who had been caught wanting something he didn't think he was allowed to want. "I have conditions," I said. He raised one eyebrow very slightly. I don't think people said that to him often. "My family is off limits," I said. "Whatever this arrangement is, whatever you know about them, they remain completely uninvolved and completely safe. Always." "Agreed. I keep my phone. I keep my outside life. I am not a prisoner here." "Agreed. And if I am uncomfortable at any point, I can say so. Without consequences." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I cannot promise no consequences exist in the world. But I can promise they will not come from me." It was not a perfect answer. But it was, I thought, an honest one. I looked at this man across the table, this contained, terrifying, lonely man who had booked out an entire children's play center so he could stack foam blocks alone in the evening, and I thought about all the children I had ever cared for. The ones who hit because they didn't know how to say they were scared. The ones who threw tantrums because they didn't have words for what they needed. The ones who pushed people away because being pushed away first hurt less. I thought I understood something about Lee Jae-min that perhaps not many people did. "All right," I said. "I'll take the job." The first week was deeply, profoundly strange. My room in his mansion was nicer than any space I had ever lived in. A large suite with a private bathroom, a window that looked out over a garden that was maintained with the same cold precision as everything else in this house. I had been given a key card, a stipend that made my previous salary look like pocket change, and the contact information for Choi Woo-jin, who handled all practical household matters. I had also been given what amounted to a brief and perfunctory orientation by Lee Jae-min himself, delivered with the emotional warmth of a hardware manual. The play space is on the second floor east wing, he said on my first evening. I typically have availability after 9 p.m. on weekdays when I'm home. Weekends are variable. What do you like? I asked. He looked at me as if I had asked him something in a language he didn't speak. What activities do you like? I clarified. Building blocks? Drawing? Play kitchen? I need to know what to prepare. The look on his face in that moment was something I filed carefully away, a complex mixture of confusion and something that might, in a different person, have been called longing. As if the question "what do you like" was so unfamiliar that his brain needed a moment to process it. Building, he said finally. Construction. Putting things together. Blocks then. Legos maybe. Magnetic tiles. I was already mentally cataloging. Do you like stories? Books. I don't know. We'll find out. Over the course of that first week, I mapped Lee Jae-min's particular needs with the same methodical care I would give to a new child in my care. Observing, noting, adjusting. It was not easy to read. He was, in fact, one of the most controlled people I had ever encountered, and disentangling his genuine preferences from his habitual performance of not having preferences was slow, patient work. But I was patient. Patience was one of the first and most important things you learned as someone who cared for children. The understanding that trust is not given, it is grown, slowly, in the space between consistent presence and zero judgment. I learned that he liked building things. Complex things, things with many small pieces that required concentration. I ordered a professional-grade Lego architecture set and watched his hands, those large ring-adorned hands that I had seen place foam blocks with such precision, move through the assembly with a focused absorption that transformed his face completely. The hard lines of it softened. He didn't look 30 and terrifying. He looked something closer to 12 and deeply content. I learned that he did not like loud background noise, but that he liked quiet music, specifically, unexpectedly, old Korean folk songs and classical piano. I made playlists. I learned that he never asked for things directly. He had no language for asking. Requests arrived as oblique statements or simply as silences in a particular direction. There is a drawing set, he might say, looking slightly away from the shelf where the drawing set was, and I would understand. I learned to translate him. The drawing set, I would say, already moving to get it. Good choice. I brought some new colors this week. The first time I said this, just naturally like I would have to any child, filling in the request he hadn't quite been able to make directly, he went very still. And then, so quietly I almost missed it, he said, "Thank you." Coming from Lee Jae-min, those two words felt like something large. The strangest part of the arrangement was the disconnect between the Lee Jae-min I encountered in the evenings and the fragments of the other Lee Jae-min that seeped through the walls of the mansion at all hours. Men came and went from the lower floors at all hours. Meetings happened behind closed doors in low, urgent voices. Once, near midnight, I heard something that might have been shouting, cut off abruptly. Choi Woo-jin, crossing the hallway below me, never reacted to any of it, which suggested it was normal. In the East Wing playroom, none of that existed. It was like crossing a threshold, not just physically but atmospherically. Whatever Lee Jae-min was in the world, in this room he was different. Quieter. More present. Still controlled, still not easy or casual, but present in a way that the rest of his life seemed to make impossible for him. I found myself thinking, sometimes, about what it must have been like to be him as a child. He had offered nothing about his past and I had not asked. I never pried with anyone about things they hadn't chosen to share. But there was something in the particular hunger with which he engaged with every childlike thing. The absorbed focus, the almost reverent care he gave to these activities, that spoke of deprivation. Not material. Something else. He had never been allowed to just be a child. That was my read of it. He had been handed responsibilities and expectations before he was ready for them, and the child inside him had simply waited, kept waiting, and found, eventually, a private and solitary way to give himself what he needed. I knew how to give children what they needed. I had been doing it my entire life. So I did. I sat beside him on the floor of the playroom one evening in November, working on opposite ends of an enormous floor puzzle. One of those panoramic ones with 500 pieces, a landscape of mountains and autumn forests, and I talked to him the way I talked to the children at Harang Nuri. Not about serious things. Not about the world. About the picture in the puzzle. About the color of the leaves. about whether he thought the tiny figure in the corner of the image was going up the mountain or coming down. He answered me, slowly at first, in short, careful sentences, then gradually more. Coming down, he said, examining the tiny figure. He found what he was looking for at the top. He's going home. I looked at him sidelong. He was looking at the puzzle piece with more attention than a puzzle piece strictly required. How do you know he found what he was looking for? I asked. Pause. He looks settled, said Lee Jae-min, his weight is going forward. When people are still looking for something, their weight leans the other way. I fit a piece into the puzzle border. That's very perceptive. He didn't respond to the compliment. But the very faint change in the line of his shoulders told me he had heard it. The second month was when things began to shift. I was not expecting it. Or perhaps perhaps some part of me had always known that this was not a situation that would remain static, that something about the proximity and the intimacy of what we were doing, the peeling back of layers that happens when you care for someone truly, would eventually change the nature of things between us. But knowing a thing intellectually and feeling it arrive are very different experiences. It started small. He began to wait for me at the entrance to the east wing rather than already being inside when I arrived. I would come up the stairs at 9 o'clock and he would be standing in the hallway, casually as though he had been there for other reasons, but the way his eyes moved to me when I appeared had a quality to it that was different from before. Less evaluating. More something else. He started asking me things. Not about activities. About me. You have a large family, he said one evening. We were doing magnetic tile constructions. A new set I had brought, with transparent colored panels that caught the light beautifully. He was building something that had started as a tower and was becoming something considerably more complex. Medium-sized family, I said, building a low flat structure beside his tower, thinking I might connect them. Parents, 2 grandparents I'm very close to. Some aunts and uncles. No siblings. Your grandparents live in Mapogu. You know that already. I know the address. I don't know anything about them. I considered this. He was asking because he wanted to know, not because it was tactically relevant. I could hear the difference now in how he phrased things, whether information was being sought for use or out of genuine interest. This was the latter. My grandmother, I said, placing a yellow tile carefully, is the loudest person I have ever known. She has a laugh like a firework. She is the reason I became a nanny. He set down his tile and looked at me. She used to watch me play with my toys, I said. I was always treating them like children, making beds for them, feeding them, taking them to imaginary school. She was the first person who took that seriously. Who said that's who you are. Not as a cute thing a child does. As a real thing. An important thing. Something moved across his face. She supported you. Everyone in my family supported me. I paused thinking. I know that's not universal. I know a lot of people don't have that. I've never taken it for granted. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very carefully, as if placing the words with the same precision he gave to his magnetic tiles, I had a different experience. I did not push. I just waited, the way you wait when a child is trying to find the words for something they've never said out loud before. When I was young, he said, play was not considered significant. Time spent on such things was time wasted. I was expected to be ready. For what I would become. Pause. I understood early that certain things were not for me. Play, I said softly. Play. Childhood. The things children need. He picked up a tile and placed it on his structure with careful precision. I managed. I wanted to say, you didn't manage. You survived, which is different. And then you found a way, quietly, alone, to give yourself what you'd always needed. I wanted to say, there is nothing weak about needing what children need. Children need those things because those things are foundational. They don't become unnecessary just because someone told you they were. I said none of these things. Not yet. Instead, I reached out and connected my low flat structure to the base of his tower, making them one integrated piece. He looked at it for a moment. That makes it more stable, he observed. It does, I agreed. He looked at me. And I held his gaze and something passed between us in that look. Something that was not quite articulable but was absolutely real, the way gravity is real even when you can't see it. Si Hyunasai, he said. Jae-minasai, I said back. The corner of his mouth moved, barely, in what I was beginning to recognize as his version of a smile. Restrained and private, like a candle flame behind glass. I felt something warm start in my chest and radiate outward. I told myself it was satisfaction at a job well done. The satisfaction of successfully connecting with a difficult person. The professional fulfillment of seeing genuine progress. I was lying to myself, of course. But it would take me a few more weeks to admit that. December came with cold air and the smell of pine, and with it came a deepening of something that I was having increasing difficulty categorizing professionally. Lee Jae-min was changing. Not dramatically, he was still controlled, still formal, still someone whose name made grown men's voices drop. But in the East Wing playroom and increasingly in small moments outside it, there were cracks in the structure. Places where the warmth underneath pushed through. He learned my tea preference without asking me directly. I arrived one evening to find a cup of citrus and ginger tea waiting on the table beside the floor mat, prepared exactly as I made it. When I looked at him questioningly, he was already deeply engaged in sorting through a box of Lego pieces, not looking at me. I observed, he said simply. I stood there for a moment with the warm cup in my hands, feeling something in my chest do something complicated. He began to ask about my day. Not perfunctorily, he asked specific questions, remembering details from what I had mentioned before, building on them. One of the children at Harang Nuri had been going through a difficult period, missing a parent who had been hospitalized, and I had mentioned it in passing. 2 days later, Lee Jae-min asked, the child, the one whose parent was in the hospital, is there news? He remembered. He had been listening that carefully and he had kept it. There is something profoundly disarming about being truly listened to by someone you had initially feared. It rearranges things inside you. And then there was the physical dimension of things which I tried very hard not to think about too carefully. Alpha-omega dynamics are complicated, particularly between adults who are in close, sustained proximity. I was an omega, and he was an alpha of considerable power and presence, and no matter how professionally I conducted myself, my body had its own responses to his nearness that operated entirely outside my rational control. When he sat close to me on the play mat, the scent of him, something dark and clean like deep forest after rain, registered in my nervous system as safe and warm and stay. When his hand occasionally brushed mine, reaching for a piece or handing me something, my skin noticed it in a way that I found inconvenient and alarming. I suspected he noticed. Alphas in the dominant range had heightened sensitivity to omega scent and response. It was simply biology, not intention. But he never acknowledged it, never pushed, never used it. Which somehow made it worse. One evening in mid-December we were reading. I had discovered that he liked being read to. This had emerged by accident. I had been reading aloud from a picture book I was evaluating for the play center, not to him particularly, just reading aloud because I often did that when assessing books, and I had looked up to find him sitting completely still, facing slightly away from me, in the posture of someone pretending not to be listening. I had turned a page. Continued reading. He had turned very subtly to face a few degrees more toward me. Now reading together was a regular part of our evenings. I had moved beyond picture books, not because he asked but because I wanted to give him something richer, and I had begun reading him short novels, poetry collections, folktales. He never requested specific things but he had clear responses. There were stories he leaned into and stories that left him flat, and I was learning to read the difference. That evening in December I was reading from a collection of Korean folklore. The story of Hungbu and Nalbu, the brothers, one generous and one cruel, and the swallows that rewarded kindness. It was a gentle, rhythmic story. I read it slowly, the way my grandmother had read to me when I was small. At some point I became aware that Lee Jae-min had moved. He was sitting closer to me than usual. Not dramatically, just a few centimeters. But in the quiet of the room it felt significant. I kept reading. By the end of the story his shoulder was almost touching mine. Not quite, but almost. I closed the book. The silence in the room was full and comfortable, the way silence gets when two people have been in it together long enough for it to feel shared rather than empty. Good story, he said. It's one of my favorites, I said. You read like your grandmother, he said. I turned to look at him. He was looking straight ahead at the space where the story had been. I've never heard your grandmother read, I said carefully. No, he said. But you described the way she read to you once. And it sounded like this. Pause. Like something you wanted to stay inside. My heart did something irregular. We were very close. I was aware of his warmth beside me. Of the slope of his shoulder inches from mine. Of the quality of his stillness, which was not the controlled stillness of a man managing himself but something genuinely peaceful, something rested. I thought about how he had looked the first time I saw him. Stacking blocks with his careful hands in the empty playroom. Alone in the space he had made for himself, giving himself the childhood he'd never been allowed to have. I thought about how different he was from that image, and somehow, impossibly, how entirely the same. Jae-min, I said. You deserve this, I said. What you have here. What you give yourself here. I kept my voice gentle, the way I did when I needed to say something important to a child and I needed them to be able to receive it rather than deflect it. Not as a secret. Not as something shameful. You deserve to have a space where you can just exist. Without it being about power or control or what anyone needs from you. A very long silence. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone easier to manage. He said it without apology, just as observation. Someone who would do the job and keep the distance. I'm sorry to disappoint, I said, and I meant it lightly as a small joke. He turned his head to look at me then, and the expression on his face was not the controlled, studied neutrality I had come to know. It was something unguarded. Something that looked like a man who had been very cold for a very long time standing in the first sun he'd encountered. You haven't disappointed me, he said. Not once. I held his gaze. The warmth in my chest expanded until I was fairly sure it was reaching all the way to my fingertips. Jae-min, I said softly. I think. Don't, he said. I stopped. Not yet, he said. His voice was lower. I need, he stopped. Tried again. I don't know how to do. A pause, and in that pause I could see the enormity of the admission, the effort it cost this man to say something he didn't know the end of. Give me a little more time. I nodded. Okay, I said simply. We have time. Something in him settled, visibly, physically. Like a held breath releasing. We sat together in the quiet for a long time after that, shoulders almost touching, in the warm room full of building blocks and picture books, while outside the city moved through its December coldness. January. The city was in full winter, and something inside the mansion had tipped. It was subtle, the way the most real things usually are. Lee Jae-min began appearing in parts of the house I hadn't expected him to appear in. Not in a hovering, surveillance way, nothing like that. But I would come downstairs in the morning to get tea from the kitchen and he would be at the kitchen table, which I had never seen before, with papers spread out and coffee going cold at his elbow, and he would look up when I came in and say, "Morning," in a voice that was still low and controlled but had something less armored in it. I would say morning back and go about making my tea, and he would go back to his papers, and somehow the ordinary domesticity of this felt more significant than anything that had happened in the playroom. He also started asking me to have meals with him. The first time he phrased it as a logistical matter. I've told the kitchen to set 2 places for dinner if you don't have other plans, which was so obviously not a logistical matter that I had to work quite hard not to smile. I don't have other plans, I said. Dinner with Lee Jae-min was different from what I expected. Different from the evenings in the playroom. He was still not a conversationalist by nature, still economical with words, still more likely to listen than to speak. But he asked me questions across the dinner table with the careful, focused attention of someone who was genuinely, actively interested. He remembered everything. He built on it. Conversation with him, I discovered, had a quality of accumulation. Each new thing connected to something he'd stored from before, so that talking to him felt like talking to someone who had been paying extremely close attention for months. Which, of course, he had been. The evening things changed between us properly was in late January. We had had a long evening in the playroom, longer than usual, an unstructured evening where he had been in a strange, restless energy and had moved between several different activities. Without settling, which I recognized as a particular kind of emotional turbulence that needed to process itself rather than be managed. I had stayed close without directing. Sat nearby. Let him move. Eventually he had settled on the floor in the corner near the window, back against the wall, knees up. I had sat beside him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "One of my men was hurt today." I absorbed this. "Someone I've worked with for a long time," he said. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, tightly contained. "He's alive. He'll be fine." But he stopped. It was my error. My miscalculation. I sat with this for a moment. Then, is he being cared for? Yes. The best available. And the situation has been addressed? Yes. Then you have done what you can do now, I said gently. The rest is not in your hands tonight. Pause. That is not how I operate. I don't put things down. I know, I said. But even you are not built to carry everything at once. You're allowed to set it down for a few hours. It will still be there when you pick it back up. He turned his head to look at me, and his face in that moment was so unguarded, so tired, that something in my chest contracted with an almost physical ache. Without thinking about it, or rather thinking about it and deciding it was the right thing anyway, I reached out and took his hand. Not romantically. The way I would take the hand of a child who was holding something too heavy for them. Steadying. And I'm here. His hand was warm and large, and for a moment it was completely still under mine. Then, slowly, carefully, as if afraid of getting it wrong, he turned his hand over and held mine back. We sat like that for a long time in the corner by the window, while the January wind moved outside and the rest of the mansion carried on its late-night business below. Eventually his thumb moved across the back of my hand. Once slowly. I did not look at him. I stared straight ahead. My heart was going at a speed that had nothing professional about it. Si-hyun, he said. Not Si-hyun SSI. Not the formality. My name the way family said it. The way people who were allowed close said it. Yes. My voice came out almost steady. I'm going to need you to be patient with me, he said. I'm not. This is not something I have experience with. Any of this. I don't know how to, stop. I know what I want. I don't always know how to get there without breaking something. I turned and looked at him then. His profile was severe and beautiful in the low light, and his eyes, when they came to meet mine, were more open than I had ever seen them, a door left deliberately ajar. I've never broken easily, I told him. Something in his jaw changed. Something shifted. No, he agreed. You haven't. He lifted our joined hands slightly and looked at them. His and mine, together on the floor of the playroom where he had dismantled every defense he had. And then he looked at me, and the look was the most direct, most honest look he had ever given me, and it said, I don't know how to say what I mean, but I mean something very large. I understood it completely. We'll figure it out, I said. Together. He squeezed my hand. That was how it began. Not with a confession or a declaration or any of the large dramatic gestures that stories told me it should begin with. It began with two people sitting in the corner of a room full of children's toys, holding hands in the January cold, deciding together to be patient. February brought its slow thaw, and with it, the cautious, exquisite process of learning each other differently. We moved, Lee Jae-min and I, into a territory that had no precise name and no established protocol. We were not yet anything with a title. We were not quite only what we had been. We were something in between, something that existed in the small, accumulated weight of 100 daily choices to move toward each other. He brought me things. Small things, chosen with a specificity that told me he had thought about them. A particular type of rice candy I had mentioned liking once months ago in passing. A warm scarf in the exact blue that I had pointed to once in a window we had passed on the one occasion we had gone somewhere together. A quiet evening walk in the neighborhood, brief, unremarked upon by either of us, but which I had thought about every day since. The complete works of a children's book author I had mentioned being formative for me. I brought him things too. Tea carefully chosen. New building sets. Books I thought would interest him. Once, and this one felt significant in a way I couldn't quite explain. A small stuffed bear from a shop I had passed, a round-faced friendly one that looked like it had been designed with complete sincerity. I left it on the shelf in the playroom without comment. 2 days later I noticed it had moved to a different shelf, the shelf closest to where he usually sat. I did not comment. I did not need to. The first time he touched my face I thought I might dissolve. We were in the playroom. Late February, very cold outside. I had been telling him something, a story about one of the children at Harain Nuri, something funny, and I was laughing at the memory, my whole face involved in it the way my face always was when I laughed. And when my laughter settled and I turned back to him, he had one hand raised, hovering near my cheek but not quite touching, with an expression on his face that I had never seen there before. Something wanting. Something reverent. Something completely unguarded. I went very still. Very slowly, watching my face for permission, he let his hand complete its journey and touched my cheek. His palm was warm against my skin, large and careful, and his thumb traced once the high curve of my cheekbone. You laugh with everything, he said. His voice was low and careful, as if the words mattered too much to say carelessly. I know, I said. I was barely breathing. Is that strange? No, he said. He was looking at me with that open, direct gaze that I was still getting used to, the one that felt like being in a spotlight but a warm one. I've been thinking about doing that for a long time. Touching my face? My voice was so quiet. Making you laugh, he said. And then watching it. The warmth in my chest was so complete now, so unignorable, that I stopped trying to classify it professionally and simply acknowledged it for what it was. Jae-min Asai, I said. Jae-min, he corrected, gentle but firm. Just Jae-min. You've been here long enough. Jae-min. His name in my mouth without the formal ending felt new and intimate and right. Me too, he said. Before I could finish, we looked at each other in the warm room. Then he leaned forward very slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back and pressed his lips to my forehead. It was gentle. It was brief. It was the most careful, considered, deliberate gesture of tenderness I had ever experienced from another person. It lasted only a moment. When he pulled back, his hand was still at my face, and his eyes when they met mine were so full of something that I had to look away first because I couldn't hold the whole of it. I've never, he started. I know, I said softly. It's okay. We don't have to rush. I'm not trying to rush, he said, a trace of something frustrated in it. I'm trying to get to you. I laughed, a small, startled laugh, and he looked faintly taken aback, and then something in him shifted and the very corner of his mouth curved upward, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen on a human face. March arrived slowly and with it a loosening. The careful not touching resolved itself gradually, the way winter resolves into spring. Not all at once, not dramatically, but through a slow accumulation of warmer days, until one morning you realize the cold has gone. He reached for me first in the end. We were in the garden, an unusual location, but the evening had been warm for early March and he had suggested, with his characteristic oblique suggestion that was not quite a question, that the tiles could wait. We had walked in the garden as the last light left the sky, talking about nothing in particular, the way we had both gradually become able to do, the easy, unstrategic conversation of people who have stopped performing for each other. At some point we had stopped walking. We were standing near the large magnolia tree at the garden's center, bare still, weeks away from flowering, but with buds beginning, the very first swelling of them on the tips of the branches. I was looking up at the buds, thinking about how extraordinary it was that all that blooming lived inside those small closed shapes, waiting, and I had said something like that, about patience and waiting and how things grew in hidden ways before they became visible. I turned to find him watching me. Very close. Jae-min, I started. He kissed me. It was not tentative. It was not exploratory. It was a kiss from someone who had known for a very long time exactly what they wanted to do, and had simply been waiting until they were sure they wouldn't break it. His hand came to my face first, the way it always did now, cupped against my jaw with a gentleness that still surprised me every time, given everything else he was, and then his mouth found mine, and the kiss was warm and slow and so completely deliberate that I felt it reverberate through me from my face to my fingertips. I made a small sound. His arm came around my waist, drawing me closer, and the kiss deepened. Not frantic, not rushed, but fuller, more, both of us leaning into it with the ease of something that had been anticipated for long enough that arriving felt like recognition rather than surprise. When we broke apart, we stayed close. His forehead against mine. Both of us breathing a little unevenly. Finally, I said very softly. The sound he made, low, startled, amused, was something I immediately wanted to catalog and keep forever. You've been waiting, he observed. I've been very patient, I said. You have. He pulled back enough to look at me, and his face was fully open in a way I now recognized as reserved for these moments. The ones behind every closed door, the ones that belonged only here. You've been remarkably patient with me, Si-hyun. You're worth patience, I said simply. His expression then was something I won't describe because I'm not sure language is large enough for it. It was the look of a person receiving something they had stopped believing they were allowed to receive. He kissed me again. Slower, deeper, his hand moving from my jaw to the back of my neck, holding me as though I were something precious that he had found unexpectedly and intended to keep. I let him hold me. The magnolia tree stood bare and budding above us, and somewhere in the mansion below the lights were on in rooms where serious men discussed serious things, and none of it touched us, standing in the garden in the early March cold. Finally. What followed were months that I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for. Spring came properly, and with it a private world that belonged entirely to Lee Jae-min and me. It was not a public relationship. It could not be, not yet, perhaps not ever in certain ways. The nature of his life required discretion, and I understood this without resentment. We navigated it with the same careful, unspoken attunement that had characterized everything between us from the beginning. We had the playroom still, which remained unchanged, still the place where he could be what he needed to be and I could be what I was built to be. But we also had other spaces now. Dinner that lingered long into the evening, the garden in the evenings when the magnolia had come into full bloom and filled the air with a sweetness that made everything feel significant. Quiet walks. The kitchen in the early morning. He kissed me with a thoroughness that still startled me sometimes. He was not, as I might have anticipated, a reserved or restrained physical presence, at least not in the spaces that were ours. He had simply been someone who gave nothing until he decided to give everything, and now that the decision had been made, the depth of it was staggering. He was attentive and warm and devastatingly certain, his hands always deliberate and careful and sure, the combination of those things doing absolutely disastrous things to my composure. In public, on the occasions when his security arrangements allowed us to go somewhere together, he was correct and contained, close but not demonstrably so, and his hand would find the small of my back in crowds with such natural certainty that I sometimes forgot we were supposedly being discreet. He teased me. I had not expected this of Lee Jae-min, but it turned out he had a dry, precise wit that emerged in private with increasing regularity, calibrated exactly to the points where it would make me sputter. You have 6 stuffed animals, he said one evening, having apparently at some point conducted a survey of my room. 7, I said with dignity. 7. They were here when I moved in. Pause. Most of them. The corner of his mouth lifted. He said nothing. The silence was unbearable. I like soft things. I said. I know, he said. It's one of your better qualities. I threw a pillow at him. He caught it. He didn't return it for 3 days, which was extremely petty and which I found completely adorable. He teased me about the children thing too. The way I talked about them, the way my entire face changed when I talked about a child I was fond of, the way I had, according to him, approximately 4 different smiles reserved specifically for child-related topics. You should have 15 children, he said once, watching me describe a particularly triumphant moment of developmental breakthrough for a toddler at Harang Nuri. I flushed. That is excessive. Perhaps. He was watching me with that calm, focused warmth that I still hadn't quite learned to be steady in the face of. But you would manage them all brilliantly. I don't want 15 children, I said, somewhat flustered. How many do you want? Not teasing now. Genuinely asking. I looked at my hands. I've always thought about it. Having a family. Having children to look after properly, not just, I love what I do, I love all the kids at the center, but having my own. I stopped. This conversation had taken on a weight I hadn't prepared for. One, he prompted very quietly. I looked up. He was watching me with complete attention, and there was something in his expression, very carefully contained, very deliberately not tipping, that told me this was not a casual question. One would be, I said carefully, the best thing I can imagine. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he looked away back at what he was doing and said nothing more. But something had been said between the words. Something had been understood. It was late April when I realized. I knew the signs. Of course I knew the signs. And Omega, especially one who had studied childcare as deeply as I had, knew these things. The fatigue that arrived differently than normal tiredness. The change in my scent that I could detect in my own skin before anyone else could. The strange, expansive warmth in my lower abdomen that had no other explanation. I bought a test at a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods from the mansion, paying cash, wearing a cap pulled low. I felt ridiculous and terrified and full of something so enormous I couldn't name it yet. The test sat on my bathroom counter for 40 minutes while I sat on the floor of the bathroom with my back against the wall, arms wrapped around my knees, breathing. Then I looked at it. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring the way she always did. Si-hyuna. How are you? Yama, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. I need to tell you something. Pause. Then, in the tone she reserved for serious things, I'm listening, baby. I told her. All of it, which was long overdue. About Jae-min, about the past months, about the test. I had not told my family about Jae-min yet, partly because I hadn't known how to explain the complexity of the situation, and partly because there is something in me that is deeply private about things that matter most. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Are you safe? She asked. The first question. Always the first question. Yes, I said. I am very safe. Does he know? Not yet. Are you happy? I put my hand flat on the bathroom floor, feeling the cold tile. I am terrified, I said honestly. And I am also, I stopped. Yama, I am so happy. Even inside the terrified. I am so happy it doesn't fit. She made a sound that I knew, the sound of a mother adjusting everything she thought she knew about her child's present life and finding, once the adjustment was made, that she was fine with it. Then you tell him, she said. And then you bring him to us. You don't know him yet. I know he's important to you, she said simply. That's enough to start with. I told Jae-min that evening. I asked him to come to the playroom. This felt right, in the space that was the most real space between us. He came in with his usual quiet certainty, settled on the floor mat, looked at me. He could tell immediately that something was different. His eyes went sharp and attentive in a way that was not threatening but was absolutely focused. Si-hyuna, he said. I sat across from him and looked at him directly, the way I had learned to look at him, not managing him, not handling him, just honestly. I'm pregnant, I said. The room was completely still. His face went through something I had never seen it go through before. A rapid sequence of controlled and uncontrolled things, like a system rebooting, running through several states at once. Something that might have been shock. Something that might have been, was it possible, something wild and unguarded and... Say that again, he said. His voice was very low. I'm pregnant, I said. About 5 weeks. It happened, I stopped. I didn't need to explain timing. It's yours. Clearly. He moved then. Without warning, without the characteristic deliberation. He moved across the mat and his hands were on my face, both of them tilting my face up, and his eyes when they found mine were... I had never seen Lee Jae-min look like this. Not once. He looked like someone who had been handed back something they had given up believing could exist. Si-hyun, he said, and the way he said my name in that moment was entirely different from every other time. There was something breaking open in it. Something vast. I know it's... I started... I know the timing is complicated, I know our situation is... He kissed me. Not softly this time. He kissed me with the contained force of someone who had been living inside extreme control for a very long time and had just found the one thing that broke through it, not violently but like a wall that is held so long it finally, gracefully, comes down. I made a sound against his mouth. His arms wrapped around me, fully, holding me with a care so intense it was almost more than I could hold. The way he held me made clear, without any words, exactly how much this mattered. I was pressed against his chest with his hand at the back of my head, and I could feel his heartbeat, which was not as steady as his exterior suggested. "Our child," he said when we broke apart. His forehead was against mine. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Our child," I agreed, my voice equally unsteady. "An Omega child maybe," he said. "Maybe. That would be," he stopped. Started again. "Your family will be." "Ecstatic," I confirmed. "My grandmother will probably faint." Something in him changed at the mention of my family, a reminder of something. "You should tell them about me," he said. Quietly but with a certainty that had a question inside it. "I will," I said. I want you to meet them." I pulled back enough to look at him properly. "But I need you to understand what that means. My family, especially my grandmother and grandfather, they love loudly. They will ask you many things. My grandmother will probably feed you until you can't move. My mother will look at you for approximately 40 minutes before she decides if she approves. And if she doesn't? Neutral. But watching me carefully. She will," I said with complete certainty. "Because you make me happy, and my mother has been watching me since I was 4 years old for signs of exactly this happiness." He absorbed this. "I'm not," he started. "I know," I said. "You're not used to families. You're not used to being welcomed in. Will be, a lot. But they're good people, Jae-min. They are the people who made me who I am, and they will love anyone who loves me." He was quiet for a long time. Then, very quietly, "I love you, Si-hyuna." The words landed in the room like light entering a dark space. Not dramatic, not loud, just suddenly and irrevocably present. I reached up and took his face between both my hands, the way he had done to me so many times. "I love you," I said back. "I have loved you for a very long time." He turned his head slightly into my palm. Eyes closed for a moment. Then he opened them and looked at me, and in that look was everything. The entire improbable, impossible, unlooked-for thing that had grown between us over all these months. The day I brought Lee Jae-min to my parents' house was the most nerve-wracking day of my life, which was considerable given what my life had been for the past several months. I had called ahead, of course. My mother had been preparing since the previous day. I knew this because she had called me 3 times about what to cook. My father had called once, his single inquiry characteristically to the point. "He's a good man to you?" And I had said yes and he had said good, and hung up, and that was that. My grandparents were coming too. This was, as I had told Jae-min, non-negotiable. He arrived at my parents' apartment in a car that was less conspicuous than his usual vehicles. He had made this choice himself without comment, wearing dark trousers and a simple dark sweater rather than a suit, which I knew had cost him something in terms of the armor it represented. In the elevator up to my parents' floor he was very still. I reached out and took his hand. He gripped it back with a tightness that was not his usual composure. "They're just people," I said softly. "People are not simple," he said, which was true. "These ones are," I said. "They are exactly who they appear to be. There's no strategy required." He exhaled. My mother answered the door. She looked at Jae-min. Jae-min looked at her. She was Lee Young-hee, who had driven me to every volunteer shift and waited in the parking lot with barley tea, who had told me at 17 that my path was mine to make, who had cried with relief when I had called her from a bathroom floor and told her I was terrified and happy. She looked at Lee Jae-min for a long moment. He held her gaze absolutely straight, not deflecting. He had no practice with this kind of family situation, but he had not lied to me when he said he understood something about me being important to people. Then my mother stepped forward and took both of his hands in hers. "Thank you," she said simply, "for taking care of my son." Jae-min, and I was watching his face very carefully, went entirely still in the way he did when something landed somewhere beyond his prepared responses. He looked at my mother's hands holding his. And then he looked at her face, and I saw something move across his expression that was not the controlled blankness and not the private warmth he reserved for me, but something new, something humbled and uncertain and very young. "He has taken care of me more than I have taken care of him," he said. My mother made a sound that was half laugh and half tears. "Come in," she said. Come in, the food is ready." My father came out of the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel and extended his hand to Jae-min with the same quiet directness that characterized everything about him. Jae-min shook it. They looked at each other, these two quiet men, and some form of wordless male assessment happened. My father nodded. Jae-min nodded back. That was apparently sufficient. And then my grandmother arrived. She came down the hallway at her characteristic speed, faster than her age suggested she should move, and she looked at Jae-min with those sharp, observant eyes that had been watching me my whole life, and I held my breath. You, she said pointing at him, are very tall. Jae-min blinked. Yes, he said. Good. See, Hyuna is short, so the baby won't be short. Ego, come here, let me see you properly. She took his face in both hands, the way she had done to me my entire life, and studied him with complete unself-consciousness while he stood perfectly still, looking, for the first time in any context, genuinely lost. Then she released him and turned to me and said at approximately theatrical volume. He's very handsome, see Hyuna. Good choice. Jae-min's composure cracked entirely. Not dramatically, there was a flicker across his face that was somehow the most endearing thing I had ever seen, the expression of someone who has been disarmed so thoroughly they don't know what to do with their hands. I laughed. I couldn't help it. He looked at me. I reached out and took his hand and he held it very tightly and something in his face settled. Not into his usual control but into something warmer, something that looked, for the first time, like a man who had arrived somewhere he had not known he was looking for. My grandfather, who had been standing in the doorway of the kitchen observing all of this with his characteristic grave silence, came forward. He was a small, upright man with silver hair and the hands of someone who had worked hard his whole life. He looked at Jae-min for a long moment. You will take care of our Si Hyuna, he said. Not a question. A statement that was also, unmistakably, an instruction. Yes, said Lee Jae-min. And in his voice was something I had heard very rarely, the absolute register of a true promise. My grandfather nodded once and clapped Jae-min once on the shoulder and turned back toward the kitchen. Dinner is ready, he announced. The meal was long and loud and full of my grandmother's running commentary and my mother's careful attention to everyone's plate and my father's occasional quiet observations and Jae-min, in the middle of all of it, navigating a situation that had no precedent in his experience with a combination of effort and genuine attention that made me love him almost embarrassingly. He asked my grandfather about his work, and then listened with the focused, total attention he gave to everything that mattered, and I watched my grandfather's initial reserve dissolve by gradations into something that looked, by the end of the meal, like cautious approval. He told my grandmother that the food was the best food he had eaten in his memory. She beamed and served him more. He ate all of it without visible panic. At one point during the meal, while my mother was in the kitchen and my grandfather was in the living room, my grandmother leaned across the table to Jae-min with a particular expression she wore when she was about to say something extremely direct. You understand, she said in a low, fierce voice, that this child is my entire heart. Jae-min met her gaze steadily. I understand, he said. He is a blessing, she said. Not just to me. He came into this world as a blessing. And whoever holds that blessing holds something very sacred. I know, said Jae-min quietly. Absolutely. She studied him for another long moment. Good, she said. Good. And reached out and patted his hand hard twice. The ultimate seal of Kim family approval. Later, when we were leaving, the long drawn-out leaving that my family required, full of bags of food pressed into arms and repeated instructions and multiple rounds of goodbye, Jae-min stood in the doorway with my mother's food packages in his arms looking slightly dazed, and I stood beside him and my grandmother held both our hands together in hers. Bok dul yo wazio, she said softly, looking at our joined hands. The blessing has come home. The same words she had said when I was born. Jae-min was quiet beside me, but his hand in mine tightened. In the elevator going down he didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, I didn't know families were like that. Like what? Like that, he said, looking for words that I could see he didn't entirely have. Like, that is what it is supposed to be? All of them, all of that. All of that loudness and food and grandmother speeches, I said softly. Yes. He looked down at the packages in his arms. I didn't know. I leaned against his arm. Now you do, I said. And they're yours too now. That's how it works with them. There is no, you don't get to be a peripheral person once they've decided you're family. You're in. Fully. He was quiet. Is that all right? I asked. He turned his head and looked at me. Yes, he said. His voice was very low. That is, yes. Si Hyuna. That is more than all right. The months that followed were the fullest of my life. My pregnancy progressed with the gentle inevitability of things that are meant to be, and each week brought new things. The first movements, faint at first, then more assertive, a small presence making itself known. Jae-min was. I had expected him to struggle with this. Expected the man who ran an empire and spoke in measured half-sentences and had spent his life behind walls to have difficulty with the enormity of what was happening. I had been prepared to be patient, to give him space to process. I had been wrong. He threw himself into it with the same focused, total engagement he brought to everything he decided mattered. He read. He researched. He had opinions about hospitals and prenatal care and nursery design that arrived without warning and were extremely detailed. He sat with me in the evenings with his hand at my abdomen, feeling for movement with the same careful concentration he gave to his most complicated building projects. And when he first felt the baby move, he went so still and so quiet that I looked at him in alarm. Jae-min. I felt that, he said, very softly. His hand still flat against me, waiting. I know, I said. That is, he stopped. His jaw worked. That is. I put my hand over his. He looked up at me and his face was the most undone I had ever seen it. Come here, I said softly, and he came, shifted closer and let me tuck against his shoulder, and we sat together for a long time, his hand on my abdomen, both of us quiet in the enormity of what was becoming real. He teased me still about the children now that it was no longer hypothetical. I said one evening, looking at the nursery room we had been designing together, a wide, warm room on the upper floor, full of light, painted in soft colors that had required 3 weeks of negotiation. One for now, he agreed serenely. One ever, I said. He was looking at the mobile we had hung above the crib, stars and moons, hand-selected from 6 different options because he had a position on mobiles apparently. Lee Jae-min. Kim Si-hyun. I see you looking at those twins in the park, I said. He turned and looked at me with an expression of complete innocence that would have been more convincing if I hadn't spent almost a year learning to read him. I don't know what you're referring to. You watched them for 15 minutes. I was thinking about security vulnerabilities in the park infrastructure. I stared at him. The corner of his mouth was lifting. Jae-min. He crossed the room and bent and kissed my cheek, then my jaw, then the corner of my mouth, and then properly warm and certain, and I made a sound that was very undignified and gripped his sweater and forgot entirely what we had been talking about. We will discuss further, children, he murmured against my mouth, after this one arrives. We will not, I started. He kissed me again. Discuss this now, I finished, considerably less firmly. He smiled against my mouth. A real smile, full and open, the smile I had spent months working toward and which still had the power to stop everything inside me. Our son was born on a cold morning in December, exactly a year, almost to the day, from the evening I had first truly felt the shift in what we were to each other. He arrived in the world with my coloring and his jaw and a pair of lungs that suggested he had opinions about arriving and intended to share them. He was small and red and furious and perfect, and when the nurse placed him in my arms I felt something happen inside me that I do not have language for, a settling, a completion, a something that was always coming and has finally come. Jae-min was beside me. He had been beside me through all of it, present and steady and better at containing his fear than I was at containing mine, though I had caught him, at one particularly difficult point, with his hand pressed flat to the wall of the delivery room, breathing in a controlled way that told me he was managing something very large. When they placed our son in Jae-min's arms for the first time, I watched. Lee Jae-min, who had built himself into something that the world used as a synonym for danger, held this 5-pound, raging, perfect small person with hands so careful and so reverent that it undid me completely. He's an Omega, the doctor said. The scent profile was clear, immediate, unmistakable. I laughed. I was crying already, which made the laugh come out strange, but I laughed because my grandmother was going to. Call your grandmother, Jae-min said, his eyes not leaving our son's face. How did you know I was thinking? Call her, he said. I called. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been holding the phone. Si-hyun. He's here, Halmiani, I said. He's healthy. He's perfect. A sound came through the phone that was not quite language. And Halmiani, I stopped, smiling so hard my face ached. He's an Omega. The sound that came through the phone then was something that I will keep with me for the rest of my life. A pure, wordless, flooding joy, the kind that comes when a blessing you did not know how to ask for arrives anyway, perfectly, exactly as it should. She was still making that sound when I lowered the phone from my ear, tears running freely down my face, and looked at my person. Lee Jae-min, who had been a terrifying man stacking foam blocks alone in an empty room, who had let me in slowly and carefully and entirely, who was holding our son with the absolute focused care of someone who had waited his whole life to give everything he had, looking at our son's face like he had found the thing the man in the puzzle was looking for at the top of the. Jae-min, I said. His name the way it was mine to say. He looked up at me. His face was completely open. Everything in it, all of it, the history and the loneliness and the hunger and the love and the terror and the enormous, unprecedented joy, everything was there. Thank you, he said. His voice was barely sound. Si-hyun. Thank you. I reached across and put my hand on our son's head, the soft, warm, impossible reality of him, and then I moved my hand to cover Jae-min's hand where he held him. We did this together, I said. Our son, apparently having processed his opinions about arriving and moved on to opinions about everything else, opened his eyes, dark, unfocused, ancient and new, and seemed to look at us both. Jae-min let out a breath that I had the sense he had been holding for 30 years. Bok Dulio Wazio, I whispered. What my grandmother had said when I was born. What she had said holding our hands together. The blessing has come home. He looked at me. He understood. His hand turned under mine and held it. Outside the hospital window, December moved on. Somewhere in Mapogu, my grandmother was probably waking my grandfather to tell him the news, at whatever hour it was, in that way of hers that made everything feel like the first important thing that had ever happened. My mother and father would be on their way. Inside the room there was warmth and light and our son, and there was Lee Jae-min, who had never been allowed to be a child and who had found his way to the thing he needed most through building blocks and picture books, and an Omega nanny who refused to keep a professional distance. And there was me, Kim Si-hyun, who had loved children since he was 4 years old and who had found, somewhere inside the most unlikely arrangement of circumstances, not just a life full of children to love, but a family of his own. We named our son Lee Hyuem, River Sound, for something continuous and living, always moving forward. There is a particular kind of sound that lives in a home where people are happy. It is the sound of small feet on a floor. It is the sound of a deep voice reading aloud, slowly, a picture book. And if you had told me 2 years ago that Lee Jae-min would one day read children's books aloud in a voice made soft by practice and love, I would not have known what to do with that information, but here we are, and the sound of it from the next room is one of my favorite sounds in the world. Hyuem is 2 years old and has his father's directness and my complete inability to stay serious, which is an extraordinary combination in a person who does not yet have a full vocabulary. He has my father's eyes and my mother's laugh and my grandmother's ability to fill a room with his presence despite his extremely small dimensions. He has Jae-min's focus when he builds things. Already, at 2, he stacks blocks with a concentration that makes him look alarmingly like someone in a board meeting. He is, without question, the person most beloved in the Kim Lee household. The playroom on the second floor still exists. It has expanded considerably, to accommodate a resident 2-year-old Omega. The inventory of soft things and building materials has grown exponentially. Jae-min still has his evenings there, though they now include a small person who is extremely opinionated about the magnetic tiles and tends to dismantle Jae-min's structures with the cheerful destructiveness of someone who doesn't yet understand that other people's projects can exist. Jae-min has adapted. I have caught him, more than once, letting Hyuem destroy something he had clearly been working on carefully, and then helping Hyuem build something else with the pieces, with the focused patience of a man who has found that this kind of demolition and reconstruction is actually fine. My family comes for Sunday dinners. This is now non-negotiable, established by my grandmother within approximately 3 weeks of Hyuem's birth, not as a request but as a fact. My grandmother has adopted Jae-min with the same fierce total certainty with which she adopted everything she decided was hers, and he has, this is the part one will never stop being moved by, he has let her. He sits in her kitchen while she feeds him things and talks at him and touches his face in the way she touches all of us, and his expression in those moments is the one I have learned to call his grandmother expression, which is a combination of completely overwhelmed and quietly, deeply happy. My grandfather and he have their own language, few words, carefully placed, the language of men who understand each other without explanation. My grandfather has told Jae-min things about his own life, his own work, his own history that I have never heard him tell anyone. Jae-min listens with the complete attention that is one of his great gifts, and stores it and builds on it conversation by conversation the way he builds everything. My parents simply love him, in the uncomplicated way my parents love things that made me happy. We are not a simple family. There are parts of Jae-min's life that I do not ask about in detail, parts of the world he moves through that are far from the warm rooms of our home. He is still Lee Jae-min in those spaces, still the name that makes voices drop and rooms change. I have made my peace with this complexity because I know the whole of him, and the whole of him is also the man who reads picture books aloud and who holds our son while he sleeps with the same care he gave to those first foam blocks. Every evening when the serious business of the world is set down for the night, he comes to find me. In the kitchen sometimes if I'm making tea. In the garden in the warm months if Hyuem and I have been outside. In the study if I'm working on something for the children's program I now run. I left Harang Nuri a year ago to open a small independent program, supported by Jae-min's resources and my years of experience, a warm and bright place in a neighborhood that needed one. He comes and finds me and his hands find me, and the quality of his presence when he does, the settling of it, the warmth and weight of it, is the thing I have stopped trying to describe and simply receive. One evening I was in the playroom, putting away the day's detritus, building sets reorganized, books back on shelves, Hyuem's particular scattering of soft toys corralled. Jae-min came in and stood in the doorway watching me. "You're still nannying," he observed. I looked up at him. He had that look, the private, warm, unbothered look that belonged to our home. "Occupational habit," I said. He crossed the room. He touched my face the way he had the first time, palm curved against my cheek, thumb along my cheekbone. Kim Si-hyun, he said, quiet and certain, who came into an empty room and didn't run. Lee Jae-min, I said back, turning my face slightly into his hand, who was building towers alone. Not alone anymore, he said. Not alone anymore, I agreed. He kissed me, soft, unhurried, full of everything between us. I put my hands in his and let him hold me in the room where we had begun. Outside the door, in the warm lit hallway of our home, Hyum was awake past his bedtime with Choi Woo-jin in resigned attendance, demanding more of whatever story he had been told and making the kind of noise that carried through walls. Down in Mapogu, my grandmother was probably calling my mother about Sunday's menu. In the world beyond our walls, things were as they had always been, uncertain and complicated and not always gentle. But here, in this room, in this house that had been cold and precise and now was neither of those things, in the life that had built itself, piece by piece, around two people learning each other's languages, here the blessing had truly come home. And it was in every way enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.